I'm Steve Clemens. I'm editor-at-large of the National Interest. I'm CEO of Whitehall. And every couple of months or so, we try to bring together a smart crowd, consequential crowd, that's all of you, in a Zoom discussion with some of the prominent really policy sculptors, business sculptors, and I would say the real architects of trying to look at the critical materials challenge, particularly for the United States, but also allies right now, as a real mission, as trying to sort of looking at how we kind of move this along way there. Many of you know, and I'm going to mention her because she may jump in, Christy Rogers and I co-founded PRISM, which is a nonprofit. It's PRISM, deals with global supply chain and critical materials issues, 501c3, in which we have major support in that. But PRISM has been out there, and I've been out there sort of saying that gravity is not going to get us where we need to be. And the critical materials challenges and needs by advancing technology, by firms at large, has just been kind of, in my view, this is my particular editorial view, neglected and kind of out there until there were some action plans. So we've been enthused the fact that this has been something to bring, that we're able to bring a lot of people to begin looking at how do you actually move the needle on some of this. We have this morning joining us Conner Prochaska, who is the director. I don't know if I'm saying, Conner, is that right?
Prochaska.
Prochaska. Okay.
Like a big joke. Yeah, exactly.
Conner Prochaska, who is the director of one of my favorite agencies in government. It is the place that tries not to let inertia drive our advanced energy interests, but looks at where do you put influence, some funding, collaborations to move America's energy interests and equities forward. That's Conner Prochaska, who's director of ARPA-E at the Department of Energy. We're also proud to have Pervinder Johar, I'm going to go Johar, who is CEO of Avathon, which very much his company, if you get on and look at avathon.com, really reflects everything we're talking about today, which is AI and how it may change the playbook in the global critical materials race. I'm so glad he has joined us, I think from California, if I'm not mistaken. We also have Mitchell Kerman, who will be joining us, who's Deputy Director for Critical and Strategic Minerals and Materials at Idaho National Laboratory, who's sort of neck deep in all of this. And then, of course, Pavel Brůžek, who I've been doing these forums with from the beginning, who is the CEO of Draslovka, a key global mining chemicals company involved in every dimension of this industry. And it was really through a conversation, I said, why don't we have something that costs us nothing to convene a lot of interesting people? So that's where we're at. We have an outstanding group. Oh, and Mitchell, I see you've joined us. So hopefully you've heard some of this for it. We're going to start with a discussion with myself and Conner, and then move to Pervinder, and then we're going to get to everyone here. I like to involve people in my conversations. If you later, this is a sharp, fast hour. You can, as my guy Nick just said, you can be promoting yourself to panelists to ask questions live if you like. Later, you can write your questions in the chat function, which are sometimes highly useful to others that are looking. So if you have materials perspectives, it's really, frankly, the smartest place on this channel to look and be. But we're going to do this. But let me just start with Conner. Conner, thank you so much for joining us. And I don't see Christy, so I think we just get. But I want to just sort of start out as we kind of think about how AI and critical materials are. AI is kind of a blobbish term. It means a lot of stuff to a lot of different people. Critical materials almost is a blobbish term. I'm interested in where ARPA-E sees the kind of definitive links between those and what you think are the key agenda items when you're looking about how AI might change the critical materials outcomes for the United States.
Yeah, Steve, thank you very much for having me today to talk about some of these items and what we're doing at ARPA-E, what we're doing at the department as a whole, because I think ARPA-E is kind of literally physically, I don't sit and forestall them up the street, but we're kind of off to the side. And that's kind of our role to be, I like to say, wave the pirate flag, try things that are going to possibly be a new place on a roadmap. If the Office of Science is going down a roadmap and going down the highway, we like to say we're going to go test out the exits and make sure that we're not missing anything. But that's very true in critical minerals. So we've got the Critical Minerals and Emerging Energy Technologies Office, CMEI, here at the department now that is focusing on the big swings of where we need to go and really focusing on that. But at ARPA-E, we're kind of looking up and down the life cycle, everything from mineral recovery to resource management, to alternative materials to say that we don't necessarily need some of the things that we've classically been choke pointed on when it comes to critical minerals. And so at ARPA-E, our job is not just to think about how we have done it and not just to try to find new resources, because we've got, there's a data problem that we've got and how we find things and what we have in existence, but also to provide optionality, to try to figure out the new ways and even new materials that we can find. And so right now we've got.
So let me just interrupt there. When you
Yes,
think
please.
about new materials, are those new materials? Are you working with industry to see about that sort of interoperability, if you can, of these new materials? Are you developing new materials and then kind of going? I mean, how do you find? Because I've always thought, why aren't we doing more of that? But then once you do it, and I'm going to be very as kind as I can to the mining industry, we got a ton of people there. I've met a lot of old miners. They don't like changing what they're doing very often. I mean, there is a lot of new tech coming into it, but how do you innovate in a way where the industry is sort of saying, hooray, we're going to adopt what you've done and move along, unless there's sort of a compelling price point?
It's part of our mandate at ARPA-E. One of the things that we say, and if you've ever been around ARPA-E, is we have a tech to market team. But from the very beginning of ARPA-E, we've asked, okay, if it works, will it matter? We're not here just to do science projects. And I give you an example when you ask specifically about alternatives.
Yeah.
Our Magneto program is working to make the world's strongest magnet without rare earth minerals. And so what does that look like? And so it's not just going to look for different materials. It's going to say we're looking for different materials to do this. And that's part of the ARPA-E mission, is, again, not to do things for science's sake. There's offices that do that, and I'm a very supportive person because I think that's one of the best things, as Ronald Reagan said, and most impactful things that the government does is finance basic science. But at ARPA-E, we have to put that second question in, that will it move markets? Will it make an impact? Can it get there? And we fail often. That's part of our mantra too, is it shouldn't be one of the things I'm working on is to make sure that it's not a red letter issue if you fail at an ARPA-E project, because we're trying to do high risk, high reward things that will go out and make an impact. And tech to market is very much one of the ways we, on a quarterly basis, judge our projects. Is it moving down the path? And if it doesn't, hopefully we find something out and we call it a day and move on and roll those funds into a portfolio management type style into things that are going to make the biggest impact.
How is AI changing the game for you in what's possible? And while I know you're not the Secretary of the Interior and you've got the energy portfolio, so I know that there are, different lines there. One of the things I've been very interested in, one of my friends, Peter Poodle, wrote an article in National Interest called, "Hey, let's make copper great again." But, and you kind of had Dan Jurgen, Alex's father, Alex is online, talking about the incredible copper needs this country and world are going to need by 2040. It's a staggering growth at that level. And so what Peter Poodle said, we need to figure out how to get more materials out of every mine we've developed, as opposed to looking at mine expansion forever, which, takes you down this horrible permitting process of how we can apply AI and new tech in that space. And we're going to get to that with Pervinder in a moment, but do you play any role in that?
We do. And to start with one side of it, not to name drop programs that we have active right now, but Recover.
I love name dropping.
Our Recover program is strictly looking at how to recover critical minerals from wastewater. That's the Recover program that we just started a couple months ago. But your question about how is AI changing it, one of my other hats here at the Department of Energy is I am the Chief AI Officer for the department. And I think you mentioned it at the beginning, AI gets thrown around a lot. And even within the Department of Energy, AI means different things to different people. If you go talk to the Undersecretary of Energy, he's worried about how do we get enough power for the power demand that is AI coming. If we talk about the Genesis mission, it's AI for science. But then also there's AI on how we operate. And it's an interesting issue currently at ARPA-E, and an issue is too strong of a word, but a question that we're actively trying to answer is, do we do dedicated AI programs like our Catalchemy program, which is working to use AI specifically to speed up catalysts so that they don't take decades to develop, that they take months or years? But also, how do we integrate AI into really all of our programs? And do we need a program director here at ARPA-E that is strictly looking at AI to kind of be a voice and a resource to our program directors across the spectrum, which is traditionally not how we operate. Traditionally, we bring a program director in, And if that's a materials expert, that program director works on the newest and coolest and most impactful problems in the materials world. If we bring an AI person in, as a program director, do we need somebody that can be a sounding board for all of our maybe non-AI expert program directors to help them develop, whether it's new advanced reactor fuels, or if it's the materials that I just mentioned, or if it's geothermal or sensing. And quantum, by the way, I would say is in that same boat. It's an enabling technology, maybe not a core competency. And so we need to understand how best to bring AI into our office and our agency here. And we're doing that across the department, but ARPA-E is unique in the way we format our programs, and we're looking at how we integrate into those things. So Catalchemy is one, and we've got a number of other programs that are working, and it's almost becoming just a default assumption. You're going to utilize AI in whatever program, whatever project you're working on, and if you're not, we're gonna kind of look sideways at that a little bit, because it's a tool that you need to be using to move these developments faster.
Let me ask you, I would tell the team to bring John DeBar in for a second. I'm going to out something he's doing, but in the last couple of minutes we have with Conner. But, I'm a big fan of your annual summit. And as I was telling you before we got going, I had the privilege and an interesting challenge of interviewing Elon Musk at one of these. And, in the past, and out in the field of people, this vast array of people, I think there were like 3,000 people in that room that were innovators, and they were very different. I mean, this was years ago. I was interested in kind of what the North Star of ARPA-E is at this moment. Is it competing against China? Is it filling the gaps? I mean, I'm not really a hyperventilist about China, what they're doing. They're doing what they're doing. I'm interested in what we're doing. But when you're kind of looking at something where innovation is global and looking at these different dimensions, I'm interested in what the North Star is for you and the many innovators out there that are private sector that you're trying to sort of nudge one way or another. Now, I know that's a very general question, would love to do it. And the reason I'm bringing John is, John, I hope I'm not getting you in trouble here, but August 31st, the National Petroleum Association. John, by the way, is from Bartlesville, Oklahoma, where my family's from. So
he's also my favorite DeBar brother.
So. Yeah, the other DeBar brother, I don't have much time for. But John is going to do this release, and so we're going to do a little prep. Everybody ought to look at it on how technology can look at not only oil and energy, but all critical materials in the ground. So, John, I want you to give like a nanosecond on that. But Conner, on that first question, what is the North Star for you and those who love you?
What I talk about a lot here right now is when I was at ARPA-E as chief of staff 8 years ago, we still are into the white spaces, the unknowns, what I call the unexplored, the unknown, and the unbelievable. Mm-hmm. And we want to continue to do that. The big difference today that I think everyone on this call understands and knows is we have a much clearer picture of the energy demand coming down the tracks at us. Right. And we have a much better understanding of what technologies can move the needle, because that's really where it's key, is what can move the needle in a significant and real way in a real timeline. And in my opinion, that's fission, that's fusion, that's large-scale geothermal. Those things can really put gigawatts onto the grid in a real time frame.
And team, just bring Pervinder Johar into the screen as well in our last couple of minutes with Conner. But John, just wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about what you're going to do next week.
Thanks, Steve, and Conner. Great to see you again.
And am I in trouble for outing that?
No. The National Petroleum Council on Monday, the 31st, will be presenting our final report on a resource assessment recommendations for the federal government and for state governments. A big part of that, germane to what Conner is talking about today, is essential minerals, which includes the critical minerals on the list, and including unconventional sources and processing of those minerals. So those of you that are interested in the subject, afternoon on Monday, please reach out to npc.org and you can get a copy of our study and results, and also happy to be involved in briefing anybody that's interested. Thank you, Steve.
I think the real story of this morning is Conner Prochaska is saying he's creating a world that doesn't need all of you critical materials, guys.
That's not true. we're additive. We're additive to what's existing. And I also want to add to the North Star question. This is actually, as ARPA-E has such a broad portfolio and looks at all sorts of different technologies, it's actually much simpler than that. the statute lays out what our mission is. We are to reduce imports. We're to reduce emissions. We're to add to the energy capabilities and capacity of the United States of America. We're to discover new ways to deal with nuclear waste. It's actually wide open, but somewhat prescriptive and helpful to look at that and say, when we're pitching a program, all right, which boxes does this check and how are we getting it done? And national security is, due to my background and my passion, we do care about what technologies are potential choke points with China. We are paying attention to that, and that does weigh into how we factor in what we're going to invest our money in here at ARPA-E.
So I know Connor's got to run, but Pervinder, we're going to hear from you in a moment. But do you have a quick question for Connor that you want to pose to him?
You're asking me, Steve?
Yeah, why not?
Yeah. So Connor, first, very good to meet you in there too. And I think when we think of mining, we break it up into kind of three different things, right? One is exploration, right? So what can we do and use AI for making it faster for us to know whether to mine or not. Second is operations itself. And then third becomes the future. I think you talked more about the future. What are you seeing in terms of, like, our goal is to get to a fully autonomous mine, right? I think it will take us time, but when we talk of a mine of a future, potentially it doesn't need any humans, right? You can have droids in system. So how do you see kind of
big idea, fully autonomous mine, 30 seconds, Connor?
We've looked at it. One of the things that I would say when we talk about fully autonomous mines is that, again, where ARPA-E needs to play. To that point, I believe that physical AI and robotics is a place ARPA-E needs to be playing for a number of reasons. For the mining capabilities that you just talked about, for some of our hot cells that we have around the department and the country. We've got canisters at Idaho National Lab that have fallen down that are going to just stay there forever. We've got pools in our environmental management program that we need to understand what's happening down there in a more clearer way, excuse me. And so physical AI robotics, I think that is an area that is very much within the bailiwick and mandate of ARPA-E, and it's a place we're exploring right now.
Well, Connor, I want to thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate you being here and hope you'll come back. John DeBar, thank you for sharing that with us. I'm going to excuse you both right now from this, and I'm going to bring Pavel Brůžek in with Pervinder. We've got about 10 minutes with Pervinder. Pervinder, am I saying it correctly? Number one, I apologize if I'm getting it wrong.
No, you're saying it perfectly.
Excellent. Well, it's rare, but it's really great to have you. You know, I want most of all, when Pavel Brůžek and his team and I were talking about what would be new and novel, and I think the issue is there's so much of mining that's tangible. You know, you're talking about real stuff, you're mining real stuff, you're dealing with real materials and chemicals and whatnot. And this has to fit into a strategic agenda. And when you kind of go from mine to OEMs and, you know, all the things that we're building out, it's remarkable how little awareness there is of that circular relationship of these things. And you guys in Avathon have kind of jumped way ahead on the AI applications of this. So I'd love you to give our audience a minute to understand how your company and AI are tangibly changing the critical materials development playbook.
Okay. I think, first of all, I think Connor did a great job of just positioning what we do, which is a physical AI company, Steve, which is where we sit at the intersection of anything that is physical and AI in there. And broadly, kind of the space that we operate in is energy and critical raw materials. So kind of it's all aspects of energy, including raw materials, aerospace and defense, and high tech, which is a user of many of these critical kind of raw materials too. The company has been around since 2013, so it was before AI was popular, came out of UT Austin, Texas, kind of in there. So today we have kind of over 150 patents in AI, kind of, and we have built a platform on that. How do you go do this journey? And I will stay focused on the critical raw materials, but for all the industries that I talked about, where our focus platform is called Autonomy. And we are focused on how do you get to fully autonomous mining at some point, right? And we break it up into two pieces, Steve. One has been on exploration itself. So the amount of time it takes you from drill to mine, including the permitting process and including looking at the seismic data, right? So we have generative AI techniques now where we feed only the sound data or the acoustic data for you to say that how am I going to go explore? And that time can be shrunk, kind of as I think Conner was mentioning, things that take decades down to months to weeks now by the use of AI. And these are different AI techniques because if you're not aware of geophysics and physics, you can't really apply AI. And so that's what I meant by the intersection.
So can I ask you a question about that? I mean, I get the geophysics issue and I imagine the algorithms and whatnot you're talking about everything, but I've talked to a lot of global manufacturing CEOs, Siemens, there's a big project coming up in McKinsey that we're involved in, others, NVIDIA. And what I understand is that compared to the digital space, digital world, digital gadget, stuff, data, where there's all the data you need for AI to work, in the physical world, that data doesn't exist as robustly anywhere near what needs to happen. So how are you overcoming that dearth of data in the physical AI space and making this work?
We actually, Steve, talk about that part of our platform is a knowledge platform. We talk about it's not about data. Data is abundant. Knowledge is very scarce. And how do you define knowledge and how do you go in the physical world when you think of a knowledge, Steve, it's the ontology. Sometimes it's ontology of the land. It might be ontology of your factory, ontology of your mind, right? So we have figured out how do you take this vast amount of data, bring it together, but don't bring it together as if it's another data lake or another data platform because Word has plenty of those. And I think the thing that you're talking about is that in physical world, you're mostly dealing with what's called operational technology versus kind of in our normal kind of ERP type of a word, it's information technology. So when it is operational technology, technology is embedded within the equipment that you're using. So there's a lot of sensor data that is coming in. But the first step of it for anyone to do a journey on AI is that just like our human brain works, right? So as humans, we always have a base of knowledge. We have a base of knowledge when we are born, right? When we are born, a baby knows that they need milk for survival, right? So they don't really know kind of it is milk. They can't say it. Then we learn. We learn kind of by watching, by listening to our parents and others. So we have this base of knowledge. And then there is the brain, which is where you do inference. So the way we look at it, that you first have to say that kind of this knowledge, how do you represent it? We have this patented technology called computational knowledge graph, which allows you to store the ontology for the physical world in there. That's where you're bringing the data together. And then there is a cognitive platform, which is where you do inference or how our brain works to go solve some of these problems. Does that make sense? Kind of, there are two different things, one being knowledge, one being inference.
Let me ask you both a question, and Pavel, would love you to come in this. And Pavel, we're going to continue the discussion through the hour with you. I know we've only got a few minutes left with Pervinder, but when I kind of look at, say, Draslovka, which I know very well, they're in Australia, they're in South America, they're in Mexico, they're in the United States, they're in Europe, and I think Africa. And the reality is, in the broad critical materials race, China has just been smarter, in my book, has been focused, in ways for decades of looking at this. They have extraordinary pricing power in these commodities areas, and I'm just interested in whether or not new tech, AI, and whatever can situate the U.S. agenda in any compelling way that it changes that map. Or is China doing what we're doing? So just 30 seconds on that, Pavel, and would love to get Pervinder after.
No, definitely, Steve. Like it plays a major role. As already Pervinder said, like in a couple of ways. Like first is it helps us to discover resources that we didn't know we have, right? So, and that's what they are doing. That's why we are partnering with them. They are excellent in that, like finding resources that America doesn't have, that doesn't know they had. So they can study the data, look in the big data and saying, well, over there's something that there's a resource, there's a new deposit that you guys didn't know, or your actual deposit is fundamentally bigger than like you think it was. And then basically we help them with the other side, which is gathering more physical data in order to actually process that material in the most efficient way to pull more throughput and pull more recovery from that rock. So they are excellent in finding rock, excellent in getting that rock into the plant. And then I would say we are really good and more excellent in actually getting as much mineral out of that rock as possible in the most efficient way to be competitive on the international markets. So that's the way of how we can do that. And in the other way is like how we can find the way around these value chains that are already locked by Chinese or any other international value chain. So finding, as Conner said, finding the way not to need these materials at the first place. Like, is there a way which eliminates that dependency on China or any other, let's say, big price mover or holder of that critical material? And that's where we are also like working in the sodium-ion battery space, where Pervinder is helping other companies that he probably cannot speak about to finding alternatives to something that you don't think there's a solution.
Don't tell him you can't speak. Pervinder, we've got like 2 minutes before you have to run. Would love to hear your thoughts on that. But just also in conclusion, I'm just sort of interested in the notion of kind of going to be out there on the kind of the AI space, and there's a lot of anxiety out in America politically and whatnot about AI. And I've always thought that if you can really show that AI was creating benefits, solving problems. One of the areas I got to know Pavel about was I was interested in, could you do smart mining without wrecking water tables? Could you create sustainability in this stuff? And it sort of seems to me that that's another part of the picture of applying AI in these ways of changing it's still okay to talk about sustainability and the environment, in my view. But is that part of the picture? And and I know you have to leave.
I think to answer a couple of questions, like China versus US, one, it's very possible for us in US to kind of actually catch up or get ahead. Because the way that China worked, my personal opinion was that it was more brute force and only China could have done it. Like have overcapacity for smelting, right? Kind of like no private sector company in US will ever do it, or in Europe will do it in the West, but China was able to go do it. So the methods were very different, Steve, kind of on how they got ahead. And I think what we are talking about is using technology and AI, that how do you not only catch up, but get ahead of it. On your second question, actually, about a year and a half back, I walk into a mine kind of in Idaho, and the first question I get from all of them that, are you here to replace us? Right. So always that fear, right? So it was funny that I walk in and no other questions. First one, are you here to replace us? And answer is no in there, because there are more jobs being created with AI than being eliminated too. But people just don't understand it. And especially you were talking about earlier, mining is an industry where people don't like to change. So you combine it with this fear that you're going to go do it. But I will give you one simple example. I think you guys saw that in a gold mine in Africa, there were more than 100 people that died recently. Right? We have developed machine vision and kind of sound-based systems for health and safety, which actually prevents the loss of life and accidents by using AI on the physical AI side. And that's a perfect example of that. When you think of it, safety is a big area of focus for all mining. And I think our products on the machine vision help you be safe, because safety is about prevention. It's not about after the fact, right? And I wish I can talk more about it, Steve, but unfortunately I have to run. But there are so many applications we have looked at in physical AI for mining that it's a net positive for all the people who work in mining, and it's a net positive for the country.
Well, thank you, Pervinder Johar, CEO of Avathon, for joining us today. I hope you will come back. Thank you for the very thoughtful, mind-stretching purview of what's going on in this industry. When we started doing these conversations, really about 2 years ago now, it's just remarkable how much the terrain has changed and continues to change in that short period of time. So thanks so much for joining us. Let's now bring on Mitchell Kerman, is Deputy Director for Critical and Strategic Materials and Minerals and Materials at Idaho National Laboratory. Of course, you just heard Idaho got mentioned, that he's not trying to replace your friends out there in the private mining world, Mitchell. I don't know if you are, but But I do want to kind of welcome you, and we've got Pavel Brůžek joining us, and we've got a lineup of some other really great people as well. Nobuo Tanaka, International Energy, Alex Jurgen. I see Bill Turen of Chevron on here. There's a great number of people that I want to bring into the conversation as we sort of go. But I love the fact that you were able to do this because I'm a big fan of the national labs and a big fan of science. Science writ large as the kind of the most important equity that I think this country has in its leadership and problem solving. But tell us about your task, because it's not just developing science. You're also thinking about supply chain. You're thinking about the exact stuff that I just laid out. So give us
absolutely.
a snapshot of that.
We go across the full gamut in the critical minerals and materials supply, from the early stage science and technology, and by charter of the National Laboratory Systems, we are industry enablers. We're not here to compete with industry or supplant industry in any way. We're bringing the best technologies out, de-risking them for our industry partners to utilize in the future and to improve their procedures and processes in order to speed up and work the entire value chain on all of this. So, of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't, give a shout out and thank Director Prochaska, for his comments as well. Right, we at Idaho National Laboratory, we are one of the 17 Department of Energy national laboratories, one of the 3 applied laboratories, and our goal is specifically advanced nuclear energy, nuclear power, and that is basically fission systems, but we also work to enable future fusion systems as well, working with our other sister national laboratories on those aspects. This does not happen without critical minerals and materials, as we all recognize. And I will point out, we do talk a lot about mining and the mining industry and actually going from ore, but the bottleneck isn't just mining, it's the processing as well. And even domestically, we have a challenge now because China owns about 91% of that critical minerals processing capability. So even if we mine the materials here, a lot of that ore gets shipped overseas. So the statement that I've heard over and over again is, well, how silly is that, right? And that's where
I was just going to ask you that. How silly is that?
Is it, right? That doesn't, at one point economically it may have made sense, but we all recognize, right, mineral security is part of energy security, which is part of national security, which means we have to re-domesticate our supply of all these critical minerals and materials, or find sources that they cannot be used as strategic leverage over our country, right? So, and that,
so let me just ask an unfair question.
Please.
If we were to kind of make reprocessing and refining of these materials and minerals great again, what is the realistic amount of time, if you had money, power, and focus to make that happen? What's that realistic time gap to bring that back?
You hit all the challenging questions, Steve, right there. I would point to, we are in the new space race as it is, right? And it starts with critical minerals and materials. And we're even talking, right, if you're looking at NASA's objectives and the objectives of this administration to get back to the moon and put people on the moon again and establish a lunar presence that's sustainable. Again, we're right there, and our closest peer competitor, who is China in this, has also made those same public statements. Bottom line, if we point back to history, and I, like everybody else, am a student of history, and we look at those lessons learned in the early 60s.
We all are.
Right. So in the 60s, President history. Kennedy very, very clearly pointed out, we will put a man on the moon by the end of the decade, right? His words, because they were using man, right? Nowadays, to be correct, right? Person, right? We're going to put a person, male, female, doesn't matter. But bottom line is that took $30 billion in 1960s dollars. That's the equivalent of about $350 billion today. Okay. It takes a lot of money and concerted effort, people of vision, people that are looking at doing this and saying it must be done as the national security imperative. So to get there, I don't know the total cost. I know it's not going to be cheap, and it's not going to, but we're trying to reduce certainly the timeline. So in the context of this discussion and where it sits is AI is an enabler of that. AI is the lever that can compress our timelines, lower the energy intensity requirements, and de-risk the projects that go across this entire value chain. So if we pair this with very serious policy renewal, policy reform, and demonstration programs, we will absolutely get there. And again, the role of the national labs here is to work with our industry partners to make sure we bring to bear those best technologies and tools that enable them to be successful in this.
I want to remind people that you can post questions, comments, your views, material in the chat area. Go ahead and do that. Send it to everybody. I'll use them to make myself seem smarter. But we're going to, feel free to do that. But I want to invite Pavel, because Pavel's been kind of my Yoda, if anybody remembers Yoda, on the kind of questions out there. And one of the things I'm really interested in, we have the national labs, we have Conner Prochaska of ARPA-E, we have industry leaders in this space. I'm interested, Pavel, in the gaps. I mean, you're kind of a good, I would call, beyond the border conscience for looking at what's smart, what's not, where are we, doing. So we've got a major player at a national laboratory. When I worked for New Mexico, state of New Mexico years ago, and we had Sandia and Los Alamos National Labs there, I mean, it was a real honor to be around these crazy people. I mean, many of them are engineers. I mean, I worked with this guy named Jerry Jonas from the Advanced Concepts Group at Sandia. Nuttiest, but most fun and interesting, provocative thinker I had met. But it takes a long time to get from those ideas to, practical outputs. But I tell, EUV lithography came out of the labs, there are things like that that happen. But Pavel, what are some of the gaps that you think that financing, capital, resources, technology can fix?
Yeah, well, I think I will start with describing the value chain in a very simplistic way. And I would say we are speaking about AI, so you need to look at that from the very simplified, holistic view. So it's compute, right? Compute needs stable electrons. Stable electrons means you need metal because electrons need metal. They need supercapping, so stable supply of the energy. And metal needs efficacy, right? So basically, that's how we describe it. And we got gaps everywhere in order to deliver. And I think Mitchell, as well as Mr. Prochaska said that we need to find a way of how to deliver on these gaps. Because when you look at that from that angle, it's about data centers that can take up to 10% of the US electricity, right? And that's a new demand. And that's, I think, what Mitchell's just said they're trying to help with, because you need a very good new source of energy. Like a US grid, as we knew it, is going to change. European, same thing. Because this new data centers, they are very helpful. They're going to help us, but they're going to cause us significant spikes in our energy grid, and we are not ready for that. We need to find a solution that's going to, again, can come from the AI, from the battery systems, from grid stability and peak shaving technologies that we need to deliver on the market. That's one of the massive gaps to even think about broad application of the AI, right? And how to do that, because in general, that's the point where we need to start. And the question and the answer to that would be that technically every megawatt of that build is made out of copper. So we need to deliver that energy to the data center. So you will need copper, you will need nickel, you will need rare earths. And so it's a pretty complex problem, but once with every complex problem, if you start separating that into small individual batches of problems, you can find a solution. So and we are partially on that. We are trying to help with Pervinder and with our company. We are trying to deliver the efficacy into the original into the beginning of the value chain, because that's where it all starts, to deliver more minerals at the sustainable price to the final markets, replace minerals that are complicated to get right now, because they are locked in by Chinese and other value chains through the sodium-ion value chains, and basically try to fundamentally
increase. How big a deal
is
the sodium-ion value chain?
It's honestly, I think it's pretty big. Like, for example, now I can speak like from the European and US point of view. It's one of the few solutions we have because it's there. The infrastructure exists.
Like it's not exotic, right?
It's not exactly,
So
like US and Europe are one of the biggest producers of caustic soda, which is basically the entrant, which is the starting raw material for that value chain. And if you look into not layered oxides, but if you look into the technology of Prussian blue analogs, you have we own and America is one of the biggest producer of the sodium sauna, which is the entry material into the Prussian blue analog batteries. Same with Europe. Like, I mean, we have the existing infrastructure to not only be competitive, but be the winner in
Mitchell, the reason I love Pavel so much is he's absolutely obsessed with this stuff, as I know you are. This is good, but I want to bring in, now I have a ton of questions and I'd like to work through them. And if Alex Jurgen will turn on his camera, I'd love to even bring him in.
Let me just turn on my camera.
Yeah, bring him and put him in here. But I want to ask Hannah Northey from Politico has an interesting question. And I think it's relevant because I think sometimes when we're thinking about critical materials and whatnot, the questions are bottlenecks, shortfalls, how you're dealing with supply, how it's going on out there. Is there an expiration date where we're like all of a sudden in trouble? And one of the reasons I think it's interesting to have Alex on here is I think his organization, which he's just joined after having been in the Pentagon working on this stuff for a while, is directly related. She asked, can you speak about the materials needed to go into AI and data centers and what bottlenecks or shortfalls in copper, lithium, et cetera, are out there? Is that a function of mining, or does that have to go through China or allies? What she's asking is, what is the geostrategic and geoeconomic map of those materials in terms of our need? Mitchell, do you have thoughts on that?
Well, I would say that we do look into those issues as part of our national laboratory objectives and looking in the critical minerals supply chain. We do the techno-economic analysis. We look at supply chain issues. We are part of the reports, along with our partners in the USGS and Department of War, in looking at, critical minerals and the domestic supply and international supply and the things that we need. Bottom line with all of it, though, I would tell you is that it's not a problem that you could just snap your fingers and solve overnight, right? I think we all recognize this. Per your prior question, Steve, it's going to take money. It's going to take time to ensure that we have, we could ensure the viability and reliability of our supply of these materials for data centers, for future power systems, future nuclear reactors. It is part of our risk assessment that we do here as well, right? You can't build a nuclear reactor without uranium, and that's occurring, naturally occurring radioactive materials. So we need to work and continue to develop our science and technology in the separations, in the processing, as well as I mentioned before, our policy and engaging with the federal government in policy reforms, because over the decades, a lot of, I don't want to call them restrictions, policies were developed because they make sense, but they may have made sense at the time, but we need to reevaluate those.
Alex,
and we need go ahead. Sorry.
Thank you, Alex. I'd love to get your quick take on that, but I also want to ask you, Abhilash Bola asked you anything. And I think this is in your arena. What are the key industries that are driving mineral demand? How do these industries help shape which minerals and rare earths are prioritized for new mining projects? I want to piggyback on that and say, do we need a war room, or where is the, I've talked to a lot of people at the Exim Bank and at Ben Blackhead's at the U.S. Development,
the DFC,
and others about where we have a repository of strategy. Where does our strategy exist? Our prioritization exist? Our understanding of what Abhilasha is asking about, what's driving the demand. And then we also sit in a global world, right? Where, you've got allies, you've got the transatlantic relationship, we've got Asia, Japan, Korea, and others, all engaged in this. And I'm just wondering where the brain is of it. Is it the Critical Minerals Forum?
We hope we can be part of the solution. So let me just start with on the data center. Data center question quickly. So my understanding of the situation in data centers is there are obviously materials like copper and aluminum that are needed in large amounts. But one of the issues in the data center economy, and this is throughout the problem with critical minerals, is you have minerals like gallium and germanium that are not demanded in large amounts, but at least as I understand it, you really can't do these things without them. That's a problem across a lot of these critical minerals is they're not high volume, but if you don't have them, you can't do whatever it is that you're trying to do. Now, again, there may be efforts to create substitutes, and the real bottleneck is just massive concentration of processing in one area. And if there are export restrictions or there's a limited supply, it's very hard to get them.
Right.
So that's why we have to think about it's to use a term from other parts of energy. It's an all of the above. It's kind of an all the above solution is needed here, where we basically need to find all the sources that we can that we deem are friendly or accessible and get them, because some of these markets are very hairy right now. So just a little on the Critical Minerals Forum. We are a DARPA-seeded nonprofit. We came out of a project called Open, which DARPA did, where it working with a number of partner companies, where we've basically been able to map out the supply chain structures for most of these minerals, flows, cost curves, how much it costs to produce in different countries. We also are involved in these discussions that are going on. There have been some announcements about pricing and what the price should be and what a Western price or Brazilian or whatever we want to call this price. We're involved in that. We are also a trade association for members. So that's what we do. And in terms of this question about where the brain is, I mean, the problem is there are probably multiple brains right now. And you asked an interesting question about prioritization. I think probably everywhere within the government, that deals with this, there are people thinking about prioritization. There are, to my knowledge, legal things such as Defense Production Act Title I, where certain parts of the government could prioritize certain industries, and that then leads to your question about what industries are demanding on this. If we talk about tungsten is very important in the defense industry. It's also very important in oil and gas drilling. So, if there had to be a prioritization there, the supplies could go to one industry and not the other. So these industries, a lot of these materials, the problem there's 60 whatever of them. They're all different. They're all different markets. Some there are huge markets for, like copper.
Right.
Some there are not. So that's the complexity of this market, and the fact that that's why I'm excited when people are, we're all as an organization for mining, for increasing refining, and we also love the idea of innovation and recycling. And I know I'm going on here, but there's just a lot of problems.
Yeah, there's a lot. So, Alex, do you and your famous dad in this talk about critical materials at the dinner table?
Oh, yes, we do. We talk a lot about it now.
Do you agree, or do you have arguments about it?
I mean, I think we agree on a lot of ideas. There's stuff that, I learn from him and he learns from me, but
cool.
we generally are.
Good enough.
I mean, we both agree this is a big issue, and it's funny because this is very different from the oil market, and that's what makes it so tricky. You can't solve this the way you could solve oil.
Thank you very much for joining us. I see in the room Chun Lu. I may be mispronouncing Chun's name, and I don't know him at all, but he's at Brookhaven National Labs. So I want to bring in another national lab. Chun, can you turn on your thing? I want to invite you down just for a nanosecond with Mitchell, as I'm interested in national. I'm obsessed with national labs. I think Pavel Brůžek is, into them as well. And you are, if I'm reading, a structural biologist. I'm really into, the magic that comes from de-siloing topics. And always not, sort of looking broadly. We've got Mitchell's working on nuclear. I don't know what you're doing in structural biology, but I am interested in the broad impacts of, in the innovation space on energy. I'm going to bring in Nobuo Tanaka in a moment, as well, to kind of look at, that side of the critical materials AI race and what you're doing.
Do you want me to start first? Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Steve.
Just real short form.
Yeah, for having me. So I'm a structural biologist. So when we talked about the environmental and sustainability, so what we're doing, supported by DOE, BER, the environmental division, we're actually exploring the AI to exploring all the protein spacing where the protein may be naturally evolved, they can handle those critical minerals. We're working on the rare earths, and or to engineer the protein coding sequence. So then we can really solving not just the mining process, but actually in the processing process. So what we have project which is funded by the Genesis, try to really using the biological protein sample, right? The protein, the peptide, the sequence, to really separate the nearby critical minerals, like a turbine from dysprosine, right? This is the golden mile period. But we are doing the basic research. What we're really interested work with the AI, industry people like NVIDIA, really to how to explore this, right? Because this is enabled by everyone know AlphaFold, right? Which enabled prediction of the protein structure. We actually, what we are doing in my group, we identify already quite some interesting target we want to explore with the industry. So that's why I'm interested in this opportunity and want to engage the how biology can be utilized to.
Well, this is how I met Pavel. Pavel is like the kingpin of glycine leaching and Glytech and sort of this. But Pavel, your thoughts?
No, I think like we need all these technologies. Like what Junlin Liu is speaking about is more or less about like modifying genomes, so bioleaching for the critical minerals, which is also a very exciting way of how we can get more minerals out of the very complicated ores like low grade locked in sulfides. Like that's one of the things where we can use the help, where like a raw chemistry and raw chemicals or relatively delicate chemistry cannot really act, right? So there's not a silver bullet, on the market, and especially with us, and I'm a technical by background, even though I'm more commercial now. It's we need to find the engineered solutions, and engineering solutions means you find a right solution for the right application and not like something that's like completely generic. If someone tells like I got a silver bullet, like he's typically lying, or it doesn't work well, or it hits the environment because it's so stable it's going to be in the ground for generations. So and we are trying to actually get rid of all that. Again, in going back to what you said, Steve, I think it's a joint task, right? Like to combine combine different parties and let them work on the different tasks while desiloing them. So basically, someone can lead the whole project of how to separate the value chain into smaller individual problems. Send them across like national labs and the industrial partners and find the one holistic solution. Because I think the issue we had in the past between the industry and the labs was that several people were working on the same problem and that looked the most exciting. And we were like losing the holistic approach that we need to get from the point A into the point B. And there is like several points in between that we need to bridge. Now I think it's a lot better, and I think like the new establishment is actually doing a really good job in getting the more holistic view and approach towards like these complex problems.
Terrific. Chun, thank you for joining us. We've got 6 minutes, folks. I want to get Mitchell to comment, but I want to bring in Nobuo Tanaka and Manaz Khan to join us in the last couple of minutes. I don't know if you know each other, Mitchell, but this is kind of the guy who ran the International Energy Agency, he was at METI in Japan, and he's like way into nuclear. Like he's way deep into nuclear. Like he's the most pro-nuclear Japanese leader of all time.
Mitchell, I visited Idaho National Laboratory, this nuclear fuel conversion facility, by the way, by Paul Dickman invited me, and I really like pyro processing, and integral fast reactor is my favorite model, and I try to implement it to Fukushima's debris, meltdown debris solution. So I really owe a lot to you for this technology. And now China is interested in this bio and IFR for the solution of the waste. Well, this is not the issue today. Well, Steve, thank you. I mean, Alex said that, yes, critical mineral is different from oil, but IEA is mandated after the first and second oil shock in 1970s, the strategic stockpile of oil. And this third oil shock, I think G7 countries ask IEA to start considering about the stockpile, a special reserve for critical mineral in France. And Fatih Birol, the current executive director, really likes that idea because in the age of electrification, this critical mineral stockpile could be the important energy security measure relative to the oil strategic reserve of oil. And I'm discussing about this issue here in Europe. And Europeans say that, well, this is a security issue, but there is not enough trust between Europe and the United States to do jointly. And they say that maybe international organization like IEA can play a role in a neutral and more transparent way of data collection and making arrangements.
Right.
And Japan's experience in stockpiling JOGMEC can help. So I think my idea is just utilize IEA as an international body for critical mineral.
That's great. I'm going to get Mitchell and Pavel's comments in a moment. I want to bring Zainab Usman for one quick comment, just 1 minute. She's been very patient. So, if you can come in, bring her into the show as well. Zainab is at the Carnegie Endowment, but very knowledgeable and thoughtful about global critical materials issues. Zainab, we got to keep it tight, but your thoughts.
Thank you, Steve. I'm now at the Center on Global Energy Policy at Columbia University. But
even better. Yeah, who needs Carnegie? No, I'm just joking. Yeah, it's good. Okay.
Yes, well, thank you very much. Listening to the fascinating conversation, the one question that keeps coming to mind is how AI and new technologies could help address the bottlenecks in the midstream segment of the mining value chain. Because when you look at U.S. critical mineral security vulnerabilities, a lot of those vulnerabilities lie in the midstream segment. The U.S. is dependent on imports of around 31 of the 60 minerals listed as critical by the U.S. Geological Survey. So a lot of those minerals have to be imported, but it's not just the raw ores and the raw commodities, it's the processed minerals that are usually imported from China. So how can new technologies address that critical choke point in the midstream segment?
That's terrific. I also want to mention, Fritz Lodge, laid out something. He said, hey, there are small markets for things like gallium and germanium. Is the answer stockpiling or something else? Rob Harleston from C-SPAN asks, are there any critical minerals issues percolating in Congress now or in the next Congress that would take action? I don't know if we've got the right folks to sort of address that, but that's interesting where it sits on the sort of legislative agenda. We've got Jed Miller sort of looking at some local and federal rules. Are there provisions for auditing uses of AI, any unintended consequences, whether they work as intended, et cetera? Really good questions out there. I wish we had had more time to, deal with them. Mickey Walsh, could AI materially shorten the path from identifying critical materials to proving a bankable resource, particularly in unconventional resources such as coal, lignite, mine waste, et cetera? We haven't even mentioned tailings, which are my favorite subject, but I sort of want to do this and give both Mitchell and Pavel opportunity to respond to Zainab and anything else out there, as well as Nobo. So Mitchell?
I think Zainab's you're directly on board, right? We had talked about the processing side of this. We are looking at this as an entire country, right? It's not just the national labs who are addressing the problem. This goes across the board. It makes sense that a lot of people are trying to look at and attack the same issues, for our industrial base in the United States. It's absolutely imperative that we have this solved. I don't think any of us has the direct solution to say this is what we need to do. it may be on a case-by-case basis with the different types of minerals and materials, and based upon the uses of those minerals and materials, which are required in greater quantity, what makes sense most economically. Do you do just-in-time type of processing, or do you have stockpiles of these? The bottom line is our country is wealthy. We have rich veins of these minerals and materials. We just need to get back to accessing them, to processing them domestically.
That's great. Pavel, I'm going to give you the last word, and I want to thank you as well for helping inspire these many discussions we're having. I think this is a good one.
Yeah, well, I think like Mitchell answered the question real well. So maybe like I would rather wrap it up with what we think we can do as the industry or as my side of the industry and how I see the situation. In general, like I believe that the fastest new mine in America is the one that is already running. Yeah, I think we need to solve this in quarters, or days, not in tens of years, right? Not in decades. So like accessing or getting more with less out of the existing resources is the fastest way forward, and these technologies should have priority in extracting like more from what we already have. Second, it's really like looking into the physical world and into measurements, because I strongly believe that the assay lag is the hidden tax of American mineral production, because AI doesn't optimize what it can't measure. And in general, like if you don't have enough data about the incoming rock, and it's a big physical problem because it's high throughput analysis of unknown material that's coming in, that's typically highly variable. And if you cannot operate a mine or processing plant like a chemical plant, because you cannot fix your incoming variable. So you need to collect as much information about that incoming material as possible in order to optimize your process. So that's why we are focusing on fast throughput, like let's say new generation of detectors that can understand what ore is coming to your process, so you can react in seconds or milliseconds and not in days, because that's currently the biggest problem. The uniformity or representativeness of the sampling and the frequency of sampling is one of the biggest issues of mining, and one of the biggest issues of mining is not able to process more and have higher throughput and better recovery. And the last is like if we are speaking about AI, we need to be sure that and we need to ensure ourselves that we got the grid and the system in place that is gonna allow and empower the AI and let it grow to its full potential, and that needs stable electrons. So stability of the grid and the stability, and I would say even oversupply of energy, and the energy storage systems will be one of the biggest questions of the upcoming period, because we will need it not only for the households and for the industry, but for the AI, because that brings the whole new complexity into our grid systems.
Well, I want to thank everyone. I want to thank Pavel Brůžek, Mitchell Kerman. I want to thank Conner Prochaska, my friend Christy Rogers, who was there in the airport listening from Prism. Mitchell Kerman, I want to thank you all very, very much for joining us today. And our special other interlocutors, Zainab Usman, Nobu Tanaka, Alex Jurgen, Chunlu, John DeBar will be on there. I'll be in your thing Monday, John, when you release that information. So make it good. Make it interesting. So I'm Steve Clemens with the National Interest and Whitehall. Thank you all very much for joining us. And we will have you back for the next one of these in a couple of months. Thanks so much.